Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots. Looters, shells, desolate, sirs, peasants, vassals. Free press. Free press. I'm a useful idiot. Today I want to talk about free press. Free press in America. And this is sort of a companion piece to my just previous video on media bias. And it's a companion piece for another reason, too, because this is also a kind of a once-over history of free press in America. From an article called Balancing Act by Frederick Allen. It was posted in the Saturday Post. And anyway, both sections of this piece were very interesting, but I thought the information should be dealt with separately. And just like the last video, I'll be essentially quoting heavily from his article as well as embellishing it with some of my own observations and analysis. But I thought it was fascinating enough that not everybody that subscribes to me and anybody else listening would be very interested in this. Great stuff. So according to this article, free press was born in the United States in 1735 when a New York newspaperman named John Peter Zenger was put on trial for libel for defaming the royal governor. His defense was that what he said was true. So no law at the time protected a journalist who told the truth that hurt a public official, but the jury set Zenger free anyway, and it established the notion of a fearless press unafraid of the truth as a cornerstone of liberty. And not surprising that idea would have to take root for a little while in the colonies. Most of the immigrants that came over to the United States came over to the colonies, rather, from Europe, we're all too familiar with monarchies, autocratic monarchies in Europe that controlled all of the media. And we've seen that this, of course, come full circle as a lot of corporate government partnerships control media worldwide now. But anyway, so they set Zenger free, and it set up this foundation for the idea of a free press that could even criticize the royal governor of New York and get away with it. So, and this led to, of course, what happened in America after that. Pamphlets and newspapers exploded in the colonies leading up to the Revolution and during the Revolution, including the infamous Thomas Paine pamphlet, Common Sense, one of the greatest documents of the 20th century, arguably. And the British antagonized this idea of free press because not only did they not like what colonial writers were saying, but they actually charged newspapers, put a tax on newspapers as part of the British Stamp Act, one of the other things that led to the American Revolution. And then as a result of the Revolution, of course, freedom of press was enshrined in the Constitution, and that's where we mostly know of it today. And the Postal Act of 1792 not only established a national mail service, but it also discounted postage on newspapers. So in essence, the government was subsidizing the spreading of information, knowledge, and news across the country. And apparently by 1835, the U.S. had 5 times as many daily papers as the British Isles, the entire British Isles. So very, very popular form of spreading information in the colonies and the fledgling United States, and a good educated electorate that we had. And elites were already having problems with the free press even after the American Revolution, and throwing off the yoke of a monarchy. Elites are elites by nature, and even back then they bristled at a lot of things that were written about them. And in 1798, President John Adams put in place the Sedition Act, which made it a crime to publish, quote, false, scandalous, and malicious, unquote, writings about the Congress or president. I'm surprised we don't have a law like that now, but Obama's not out of office yet. But so yeah, let me repeat that because it's pretty staggering that in the United States, in 1798, President John Adams put into law the Sedition Act, which made it a crime to publish false, scandalous, and malicious writings about the Congress or president. And of course, immediately following that, President Thomas Jefferson repealed it. So freedom of press was once again granted. But needless to say, we've had persecution of press ever since, and a long history of it. And not all free press obviously yields the best results. And as a matter of fact, in this article, it points out a quote from a British observer in 1871. And he said he would describe the typical American newspaper as, quote, a print published by a literary Barnum, whose type, paper, talents, morality, and taste are all equally wretched and inferior, who is certain to give us flippancy for wit, personality for principle, bombast for eloquence, malignity with satire, and news without truth or reliability. So I guess our media has pretty much been consistent, at least since the 1870s. And journalism had such a bad reputation going back through American history that the actual first school of journalism was at Columbia in 1904. That was from an endowment from Joseph Pulitzer. Everyone's familiar with the Pulitzer Prize named after this guy. And his goal was to, quote, raise journalism to the rank of a learned profession, unquote. So that is when the type of journalism that we're familiar with now, or at least we used to be familiar with, blossomed. And in 1922, editors founded the first professional association, the American Society of Newspaper Editors, and drafted a code of ethics that declared, quote, news reports should be free from opinion or bias of any kind, unquote. A lofty goal, to be sure. And for the most part, through the 20th century, people got comfortable with the news and felt like they were getting the truth and that it was a source that was reliable for getting information. As a matter of fact, as media expanded further into the 20th century, it included radio and TV, impartiality in news was just presumed. And of course, now we have the internet, which makes it far, far, far more complex. But an interesting aspect of media and free press, little known fact is when the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, the government controlled all reporting on the topic, and the official story was that no deadly radiation was released. So the government was able to basically cut America off from the story of deadly radiation in Japan after dropping those bombs for an entire year. And the real story was published a year later in the New Yorker in a major expose that shocked all Americans. And, so that gives you an idea of the level of censorship that can go on. And that was 1945. And so we've had vast improvements on censorship in the last 70 years. And then we get to the 60s when Walter Cronkite was the voice of the news. And people felt like journalism was journalism. And there was a lot of independent press and a lot of independent newspapers all over the United States in most of the 20th century. So there was a lot of actual journalism out there and competition. But things kind of changed. A big demarcation point, a couple of them actually, were in the 60s. One was when Walter Cronkite publicly came out against the Vietnam War that helped bring the LBJ, the Lyndon B. Johnson administration, down. I remember seeing that, and it was rather shocking. When Walter Cronkite, of all people, came out in public and spoke against the Vietnam War, a very pivotal moment. But another pivotal moment of that era in the 70s is the Washington Post, of course, printing all the Watergate material, and the Pentagon Papers coming out in that era. So there was enough free press that material like that could reach the public. And but now, as I say, it's gotten more complex having a free press because we have cable, we have internet, we have newspapers dying. One of the advantages of a newspaper is you can hold it in your hand, and that theoretically all that material is available to you. And the fact is, on the internet, it will be extremely easy at some point, if not already. I'm sure the software is developed and being applied in different ways, but the fact is that you could take out excerpts from e-books, and people would not even probably realize the difference. The government and other forces could easily manipulate all material out there? What if all history books are e-books in the future? What if all information, just as it is now, moves towards the electronic digitalization? Much, much easier to control, much, much easier to censor. Restrict whole books, just drop out certain passages, just remove sections, just shut out certain material. Very easy. So the idea of a free press in our modern age in America and anywhere else is very much in question with this kind of technology. And a lot of it's not a new idea. We've been moving this direction for a while. The Hearst newspapers had a huge amount of influence during the 20th century. There was one point where reports were coming back from Cuba during the Spanish-American War, and all they had was pictures, and they said, well, there isn't really anything going on down here. And Hearst was said to reply, send me the pictures, I'll create the war myself. And then Hearst had a lot to do with using his papers to fight against hemp and marijuana, encouraging marijuana prohibition in the 20s and 30s. And so once having the press being used for agenda just as it is now is not nothing new. And it's kind of funny as well that a lot of the bankers and robber barons in the early part of the 20th century and the people that set up the Federal Reserve System were all buying up press and knew they had to control public opinion. And they wanted to basically control public opinion by creating it with their newspapers. And oddly enough, one of the things that I thought was funny about this recent Associated Press scandals, Associated Press is a news brokerage. And they are one of the organizations by which news is generally controlled. So now the handlers and the elites figured out that instead of just trying to buy up all the newspapers, it was easier just to control the news sources. So a couple of huge notorious investors and people behind the scenes are now invested in Associated Press, and they're the ones who control the news by actually providing it, syndicating it across the world in newspapers with articles supplied by Associated Press. And another part of that puzzle, too, is the fact that laws in different cities have been stripped, where it used to be that you could only have, there was restrictions on how much media could be consolidated in a city, so they had to make sure there was multiple owners of different newspapers and radios, and all that's been stripped away. So now you can have owners who control every newspaper in the city, every radio network in a city, every TV station in a city, and they can own all of them, and they can own them in almost every other city. So obviously that's going to have some problems with free press in the U.S. So I guess what I'm saying is that free press is relative. I think the glory days in the 20th century, which certainly have plenty of questionable, dubious moments that have been used for propaganda agenda for the entire 20th century, the fact was that there still was a level of journalism out there and outlets. And now the Internet has replaced that for the time being. But like I say, ultimately, I think the Internet and its as a news source will be easier to control than newspapers ever were. So there we have it, a little overview of free press in the United States. Once again, I want to credit Frederick Allen and the article Balancing Act for a lot of the actual facts. And I think important to take a quick once-over from a historical context to get a better idea of where we are at in America right now, which is not a very good place. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too. And remember, if I agreed with you, then we'd both be wrong.